Welcome in to the Phoenix Downbeat. I'm Drew Kreisman, along with my brother Ira Kreisman. You know us as the Everything is Final Fantasy podcast. We are joined once again by our friend Ryan Laney of Airship Overdrive, and this time it is to break down an absolute all-timer, one of a lot of people's favorite musics. I've done a lot of Googling over the years, greatest pieces of music in Final Fantasy history, greatest compositions in Nobuo Uematsu history. Just I'm curious to see, what other people think. Also, because when you do that, you usually end up with a playlist of about 2 hours of music with which you can clean the house and do the dishes and stuff. So this one is on top or near the top of a lot of people's lists, which is fascinating to me. We're talking about, from Final Fantasy VIII, Man with a Machine Gun. Very on the nose. Very... What's this one about?
It's a banger. It's a bop, as the kids say. It's one of the songs that is easily one of the most, as you just said, requested, most well known. And as we go through this episode today, I will remind the listener, even though Final Fantasy VIII is not my favorite game or even my favorite Final Fantasy by any means, I think its soundtrack is the best in the history of games, which we're not going to dive into why I think that today too much. But this is one of those songs that just, again, shows off Uematsu's genius. And we're going to talk a little bit about some synthesizer stuff, because there's obviously some interesting sounds that are being used here that Uematsu hasn't dived into too much in the past. Yeah. And it also serves a really cool story purpose as well when we hear these things. But yeah, what happens in the game when we hear the song?
Good question, man.
What indeed?
What does happen? It's not clear for a long time.
Yeah, those were the two sort of framing devices I have for this piece. They are really interesting, right? One, Uematsu goes to a place where he dabbled in some of this, but he really hadn't gone all the way to this place as a music maker, nor had the stories of Final Fantasy, not only Final Fantasy VIII. So you could talk about it just in the realm of itself, right? You basically have this opening act of the game, and we're introduced to Squall Leonhardt and Quistis Trepp and all of these other characters, and Balam Garden and Seed, and we get a foundation, essentially, the way you do in the first act of a story. We are given whatever the normal, and we've called it the weird one every time, right? But you got to know what the normal of this world is. And then the very moment you have that foundation underneath you and your characters go through Joseph Campbell's crossing of the threshold to leave their homeland and get onto a train, they all fall asleep and the story goes to somewhere else entirely, and we have no idea if it's your first time experiencing it, what's going on, who are these people, what is happening. This is a different story. I was just doing story one. What is this?
Yeah, it completely breaks you away from the story of Squall and crew and the Seed program, and suddenly, like you just said, your party falls asleep on the train. I think it's Squall, Zell, and Selphie. That's like your by default party you have to be with, because Questis is gone, I think, or
there's some storyline reason, but yeah, it's those three.
Yeah, so you have those three, and then while you're on the train, you hear this high, tinny, piercing sound, and you all pass out. And you are suddenly in a completely different realm, controlling three completely different people, Laguna, Kyros, and Ward. And there's even little text boxes that pop up that are a faded away, question mark, question mark, question mark, where even the game is prompting you to be what is going on here? What's happening? And you get into your first battle running through the forest, and you hear this song. Whoa! Where did that come from?
Ryan, that is what we would have called in my day techno, or what the kids would call EDM, or even just more broadly club music. Is this not club dance music?
It legit sounds like it could be written by Darude or Chemical Brothers, doesn't it? It has that same sound. So I got to ask you guys first, when you first played Final Fantasy VIII, like roughly what ages were you guys when you first played it?
Oh, I can calculate this. I was born in 86. It came out in 99. We would have played it right away. So 13 or 14.
Okay. That's about when I played it as well, a couple years after. Ira, how old were you roughly?
So I'd have been 18. In fact, I think I had come back from college.
Yeah, or even that you went off to college in the middle of us playing this game, which frankly was rude. Inconsiderate of you to do that.
Honestly, what was I thinking?
Yeah. So in that like frame of mind, given that like Drew and I, we were kind of like in that middle school, high school age, and Ira was properly college age, you're playing through the game, and a lot of it is kind of that typical orchestral game soundtrack music. We hear stuff that sounds very soft and flowing, like Balam Garden. We hear the orchestral rock, like The Landing when you invade Dalit. And then out of the blue, you hear this. What did you guys first hear when you first went into the Laguna sequence, and then you heard this song for your first battle?
It sort of sounds like we're going back in time, because it sounds a little more like 80s movie soundtracks that I liked when I was a kid. Not Land Before Time, but like Neverending Story is a little more kind of like that. In fact, The Princess Bride is very synth heavy in its soundtrack. So that's what it reminded me of. And I was like, oh, now, spoilers for Final Fantasy VIII. Are we doing spoilers? I don't know.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we probably won't spoil the end of the game in this conversation, but we about to spoil the hell out the middle of it. There's no way to do this without, I think. So yeah.
So I mean, because there are time travel shenanigans throughout this fun, bizarre story. I didn't really think of it at the time, like, oh, they're sending us back in time with this music from the 80s, this dance music from when I was a kid. But it sort of feels like that now.
Right. I don't believe this was the first time I ever did this, but it's one of the very first times I can recall ever setting down the controller and not playing the game so that I could hear the full piece of music, because I was so taken aback by it. I was so blown away by this color shifting. I think even when we talked about it in our episodes, I oddly enough compared it to, there's a scene in Fight Club, if anyone's not familiar with that movie. It's very, very dark, gritty. Most of the film is like gray and brown and washed out in black. And there's this moment where he's trying to get, I'm not going to totally spoil everything, but Brad Pitt's trying to get Ed Norton to basically to find his Zen. And there's one shot of like a bright green forest that is color that cuts through everything else. And this particular scene, like you mentioned, you're also in a forest. It's very green. The first time you hear it, everything is very green. And it reminded me kind of that, the way it just bursts through with a completely different color palette than everything that was on really either side of it. And so I was just like, what are they doing?
Yeah, it's really clever how, and I had a very similar experience where I was just like, A, this music is amazing, but B, like, what has just happened? And obviously the music, as you both alluded to, does a great job of kind of separating you, whether it's via timeline or via your kind of like headspace of where you are. And it takes you from the typical Balam Garden and Dalit areas and, meeting with the Timber Owls. It breaks you out of that really hard, like pretty violently, to be honest. And it's like, here's new people, new place, new music entirely, as though it was a new game completely. And for those of you at home that might not know this, in the production of Final Fantasy VIII, they originally wanted the Squall side and the Laguna side to be more like two properly complete games that went parallel. But then in production, there's always things that have to get cut or altered. And it became more of a focus on Squall with some flashback type things into the Laguna sequence. And of course, you can play the game and see that balance for yourself. But it really does kind of jerk you out of that to say you're not there anymore. You're now in this weird place that sounds like, the 80s, like Ira was just saying. They also put this stuff where like the percussion parts in this, it's this very echoey kind of like industrial rock sort of sound without sounding like too heavy. But we do hear those like kind of pipe banging sounds in the B section of this song. We hear this kind of that sounds like some sort of weird synthetic percussive instrument in the background. And then, of course, the actual notes themselves are played on a synthesizer type thing. And so you hear this to start, and immediately your brain is just like, what is going on here? And I think it's so clever how the music you hear in the Laguna portions, not all of it, there are certainly a lot of crossover songs between the two, but because it makes such a drastic break, and then I think the first sequence is also where Laguna and Party, they go to that nightclub in Daling City, or in is it Daling City? I think, yeah, Daling. Yeah. When they go to the nightclub and they meet Julia, and then the Squall Party wakes back up on the train, and they're like, what was going on? Like, I had a weird dream. I was like some loser who couldn't talk to the girl at the bar. And it's just like, what is going on here? This song, however, is the only one that only plays when you're in the Laguna sequences. It never plays when you're controlling Squall, or, spoiler, when you actually meet Laguna later in the game. It doesn't play there either. It's only during the flashback sequences. So this is a song I want to talk about, because not only does it talk about synths, and I love synth effects, even though I'm primarily a guitar player these days, but it has that sound, but it's also a great bit of world building into how we broke out to make this song so unique in the context of the game, right?
Yeah, I really do love stuff like that. And yeah, you're right that it is that sequence, and he wakes up and Squall famously says, "I dreamt I was a moron."
Yeah, that's right.
Which is such a good line. But yeah, it is a piece I've always absolutely loved, and it's surprisingly short. It's one of those things that doing this has reminded me about a lot of these pieces. What we said, Elia Maiden of Water was 38 or 40 seconds or something like that before it loses. About minute 20, minute 30 before it gets into its loop, and it's fairly simple in several ways, but a lot of little intricate details. Our old friend, the hammer on anvil, comes back, but we've got those synthesizers that are really unlike anything we've heard in Final Fantasy before.
Yeah, this is the one where, like, Uematsu, part of why I think Final Fantasy VIII is his best soundtrack is because he incorporates all the tools at his disposal in a really, really good way. We discussed the Blue Fields overworld theme last episode, and he uses these like weird steel drums with oboes, with pizzicato strings, with vibraphone in the same song, and it works. And he was really trying to break the rules, so to say. I've mastered the rules. Now we're going to break those rules and make something that sounds like what I want it to be and really shape the tonal landscape. This song, it's like Drew was just saying, it's a pretty straightforward song form. We have a little 4-bar intro, or it's about a 6-bar intro, and then we have our A section that's played twice, and then a B section that's played once. You could argue that that's a B section with like a kind of addendum C part at the end, and then back to the top. It's, as far as song form goes, it's not a complicated piece. But at the same time, we hear a lot of the repeated things brought between sections and kind of like hinted at or borrowed. So it still sounds like one cohesive piece. The percussion is very similar across top to bottom. And there's that little motif or rhythmic, glue where you hear at the end of a bar those 2 16th notes. So for example, at the very start of this one, we hear this. Or just. And whichever way you hear it throughout the whole entire piece, it's got that little da-da-da, which when we listen to another song in a little bit, we're going to hear that again. So at the very beginning, we hear the short 1-bar version. Later, we hear the one that's like 2 bars long. And then into the final part, he keeps going with that same theme the whole time. And let's hear it again. And so that little da-da-da, da-da-da it just keeps coming back so that it glues the whole piece together. It's like you just said, it's a very simple piece.
Yeah. The da-da-das also remind me a lot of John Williams. Either, we've talked about Indiana Jones before. Those almost have a little more Jurassic Park-y sort of vibe to them, the da-da-das. But yeah. Technical term again. We should put together a lexicon of, what did I say? Dingy chimey last time. We got the da-da-das, the walkie downies. I'll put together a little lexicon.
I was a percussionist in college, and we would frequently refer to parts of songs as like what they call drum speak, which is where it's like, oh yeah, that part where the snare drums kind of go, and we all just know what they're talking about. Or like, yeah, the weird like triplet part that has like a hirta in the middle, and you're like, oh yeah, it's like, it's kind of like the thieves' cant language, where it's not words others might recognize, but you speak the language with others of that type, Ira, do you have any thoughts on the sound we've heard so far on this?
Did either of you ever watch The Good Place?
I actually just finished my third rewatch like a week or two ago.
I love that show. There's a part where Mene Jacinto's character says something like his version of hell would be he's in the club waiting for the beat to drop and it never does. Something like that.
Yeah.
And so it has that build up, and then it does the thing, and it's a very satisfying piece in a lot of ways. And as we were waiting for that, the culmination of the building to drop, as it were, just made me think of that character.
Yeah, and another part of it that I can't do this episode without talking about is just those first couple little, like the little kind of higher part and the bass part that come in. They set the tone for this piece so well. Where you start off hearing this sort of thing. Very straightforward, pentatonic melody, nothing too odd, but it is a syncopated 16th note rhythm. As I'm saying this, I can see Drew literally dancing on the screen, yeah. Ira's dancing on the screen, and then the bass part comes in, and it's just like, you can't not hear that and just start kind of grooving in your chair, because it's just such a good, catchy, but simple part, to be honest. The song overall, it's based in D Dorian or D minor, depending on which part of the song you're looking at, which is basically a variation on D minor, D natural minor. And it pretty much stays there, aside from a couple short modulations at the end. Like you've probably heard me before talk about how Uematsu likes to, at the very end of the phrase before the song loops, he'll put in some modulations. And in this one, even though we are pretty firmly rooted in some form of D minor or a D minor mode throughout the whole song, we suddenly go from D minor into A minor into C minor, which is a weird departure. So something weird's coming up, to then G minor, and then B minor, A, G, D over F sharp, E minor, D minor, and we're just going down the scale, C, B flat, F over A, ending on G minor, to be specific. And it's a weird structure how he ends it on the 4 before he goes back to our 1 of the scale, because the 4 to 1 has a lot less tension than you would have from going, like if this is where the key were in D minor, you'd expect the most tense to be like an A7 chord to get us back around. But instead he just goes G minor. And there's a lot less tension there. This is something that's very commonly done in pop music, in jazz music, in the non-classical, quote-unquote, music. And so he embraced that. And he was like, no, I'm going to do my fancy Uematsu borrowed chord modulation stuff I do. And then back to the top. But it doesn't feel like the song is drawing back to the top. It just kind of loops very, very naturally.
Yeah, that is. I've always wondered about that section, because something else that happens, and I'm going to play you something that it reminds me of here in just a moment. But for much of the song, you mentioned there's the one bass line that's going up and providing, it's almost like melodic or a counter melodic bass line, right?
It's a counter line for sure.
Yeah. But underneath that, you've got just a basic, bass line, sort of, again, that kind of electric, just following the chords along with you, right? Yeah. During our B section, I know that your favorite parts of these shows are when I start singing the rhythmic parts, and I live for that, to give that to you. I'm about to do it again, because when we get to the B section, it becomes a little more pronounced, that bit on the descending that you just took us through. I
Yeah.
know I'm not about to play Hawaii 5-0. That's what it sounded like. Right. Actually, what it reminded me of was this.
What is that?
That is Blue Man Group, for those of you that remember what Blue Man Group was or is. I hope still is.
I think they're still playing. I could be wrong, but I think they are.
Yeah. So I went through a phase where I got super into Blue Man Group, and I had this concert that they did on DVD where one of the people explained that the basic premise for the group was like, imagine a tribe of people had never heard electronic music before, and then one day did, and tried to recreate that with just the pipes and implements that were laying around. Right. And so they essentially make electronic music without any computers.
Yeah, it sounds like there's something wrong with it compared to a typical acoustic instrument, right? Like there's something that's been altered about it, even though it might be entirely acoustic.
But when you hear this, and tell me now if I'm hearing things, but I'm just going to again play this first little bit and then go back to Man with the Machine Gun, right? Right, on the bass line.
There was that bass part. Play it again so we can. Oh, you just closed it. Play it again, and listener, listen to the bass line that's kind of going. It's going to be probably this one. It's like, listen for that part on the bottom end. And there's that part, and it sounds wrong, right? It sounds like something weird about it.
Yeah.
Do you guys have any guesses of what that is?
There's something about so it's called the drumbone, I think is what they call their instrument with the PVC pipes and drumming on it.
Yeah, it's basically like 2 or 3 PVC pipes, and then as one of them is playing and like hitting it with literally just sticks, another one is extending one of the pipes, which makes the instrument longer, which makes it make a lower sound. Yes.
Right. And so there's something about how that vibrates that's different than how a brass instrument vibrates. And it provides, so it's got the deep sound, but it's also got like a higher tinny sound over it. It's almost like a reverse drone from a bagpipe that's higher and I don't know, disrupts it somehow.
Okay, you guys are doing all the most amazing segues for the thing I wanted to discuss this episode. Is there anything else that either of you wanted to talk about before I dive into the kind of tangential thing I wanted to discuss?
I want a full history, man.
Floor is yours.
So what's happening here, and I'm going to basically give this to the listener in a way that hopefully this inspires you to look up some information, look up some videos on these topics. I'm not going to get super, super in depth on it, but basically how a synthesizer works, like what it's actually doing. What's happening when you hear a synth, and we're going to talk about the drumbone and similar stuff here in a minute, is basically what's called a voltage-controlled oscillator. Now, if you guys had heard that, I'm assuming that Drew and Ira have never heard this term before. If you hear that term voltage-controlled oscillator, what would you guess as the layperson this refers to or is?
Okay, well, voltage is an amount of energy or an electricity, right, to control that, and it's oscillation. Oscillation is to go up and down or back and forth. I don't know if back and forth, but that's so the control of the back and forth or up and down of energy.
Perfect. That's pretty much it. Sorry, Ira, he stole it all from you pretty much there. But it's basically a way to control the oscillations, which of course, if it's some sort of back and forth, then it's something that can be measured in, frequency, numbers of times per second, etc. And it's based on voltage, electricity. And so if you go back into the 60s and even earlier than that, really to these really, really old synthesizers when electricity was kind of becoming harnessed as a means for good, you can find that in the 60s, when primarily Moog, the guy who built a lot of the original Moog synthesizers, was building this stuff, it was basically taking the measurements of like a transistor, a resistor, and putting them through electricity into a VCO, a voltage controlled oscillator, and basically producing sound that way. Because if voltage is a measure of some sort of energy, or I think it's called like potential electric energy is like the fancy term for voltage, and you can control how fast or slow it then is oscillating through a resistor and various other chips and whatnot, then you can make a certain vibration at a certain speed. And if you can make a certain vibration, then what might that translate to?
That's how you make sounds.
That's sound. And sound is literally just vibrations in the air made from some other medium. And there's a whole discussion there to be had, right?
When we get into string theory, everything is just vibrations.
Yeah. If we want a really long episode.
Right.
But what's happening here is so cool, because what they also did is they basically found ways to do what's called subtractive synthesis. And if I were to tell you guys that term, what might you guess subtractive synthesis is?
Well, synthesis is when you bring things together. So subtractive synthesis sounds like a contradiction to me.
And you are on the right track.
Is it like in color theory when you're doing light and color and you remove a wavelength in order to get a particular color?
Okay, it's funny you say that, because I was going to use the example of like RGB sliders in Photoshop or something as the example. So this is spot on. If you were to take, for example, if you had RGB sliders, to put it in color terms, and you had the green all the way down, but you had red and blue all the way up, what color might you get if you mix red and blue? Purple, right? Some shade of purple is going to come out. And as I pull that blue slider back more and more, what's the color going to slowly become more of?
Redder and redder.
Yeah, it's going to get redder and redder until eventually you have your red slider all the way over, and then your blue and your green are zeroed out, right? And this is exactly what happens with synthetic subtraction as well, or subtractive synthesis. If you take the purest version of a synthesized tone in something like a Moog synthesizer, you get a sine wave. If you take a sine wave, it sounds like this. And it's just a relatively pure tone, top to bottom. There's nothing really like gritty about it. And you've probably heard that tone before in like test sequences for TVs or like small electronic devices, because there's nothing really like altering it. But then you can take that sine wave, which if you look at it on a spectrogram, it literally looks like an up and down, nice, smooth roller coaster shape of your tops and your bottoms, to then make the actual sound produced. And that goes into the whole thing of how frequencies work and how sound is moved through the air and etc. But that's the bulk of what you're doing. What they figured out, though, and this is going to get into Ira's point about how the drum bone sounds like there's something missing from it, like there's something not quite natural going on here, is they realized that if they could feed the sine signal back into itself with what's called a phase polarity switch, you can remove some frequencies from that actual sine wave. So let me ask you guys this, and for the listeners at home also, what would you guess a phase polarity shift might be?
Damn, I was hoping I dodged that one. I was like, oh, he's going to ask us to do that one. A phase polarity shift sounds like some Geordie LaForge, like, Captain, I know you said I've only got half an hour to fix the phase polarity shift, but I'm going to need 2 days. And no, Jordy, actually, now you have 10 minutes or we're all going to die. I don't. Okay, so polarity, the poles tend to refer to two opposite spots, right? So you just described the waves as a roller coaster of being up and down. I will assume that so polarity shift, the poles are up and down. If we're shifting that, then we're changing them around. We're putting them in different spots. If we change where the poles are, presumably that is going to alter our vibrations and our sound.
You're on the right track. Like, this is all correct.
Altering poles over here, Ira. You got a better answer.
No, not well. The other thing I was thinking about is that waves can sometimes cancel each other out.
Yes, that's it. That's it.
Okay.
so what Ira just said.
I said a bunch of nonsense. She said 3 words.
See, this is so good because like Drew's the more talkative of you two, and so we get to hear him like thinking through it, and Ira's just sort of like perceiving it, and he's like, "All right, where's he going? I'm gonna steal all the thunder at the end and just say waves can cancel each other out." Haha. But you're spot on, like seriously, because that's what's happening here is when it comes to waves or like magnetic forces even, or other things that have current or flow or energy, they can cancel each other out. And perhaps you've been in a place before where you like stood in a room where in one spot you like just say a word, like just something in your natural voice. And in one spot, it can sound very loud all of a sudden where it's like, whoa, it's just like it's reverberating everywhere. But then you step 2 feet over and you hit what's called a dead spot where you talk and it just sounds like nothing's coming back to you. And it like weirds your brain out. Have you guys ever like been in a dead spot before?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and like when I was in college, there was a studio we had where we'd have guest speakers come over sometimes, and they would stand in a certain spot on accident, and they would just go, "What?" And like their eyes would like just be all confused, like, "What just happened here?" And everyone in the room would go, "There's a dead spot there. Just go a foot to the right. Just there's a dead spot. Don't worry." But that's exactly what happens.
There's a piece of art at the Denver Art Museum, and we were just there a couple of weeks ago with Grandma and the baby. There's a very large like bowl made out of a specific type of material. I don't know what, but the idea of it was that if you stand in certain spots, you have to view it from certain areas. And if you talk, the person behind you can hear you totally clearly. And so as you were describing that, I was like, this sounds like a purposeful manipulation of this concept.
That's a spot on explanation. It's purposeful manipulation. That I couldn't say it better than myself than just that right there. And what they're doing is basically with that concept back to the phase polarity is if you feed the signal back into itself, and it's instantaneous. You have to only delay the signal by fractions of a second. A human cannot perceive these small differences of delay. But when you feed it back into itself, you can purposefully switch the polarity. And so when it goes back in, it cancels each other out. So if I were to play like the note C here, and I played it the same way back into itself, but flipped the polarity, so that basically on our sine wave, all the ups become downs and the downs become ups, then they literally cancel each other out, and the whole entire wave just looks completely flat. There's no sound coming out, or barely any sound whatsoever. So what they did was they took the very pure tone that a sine wave could make, and they said, wait a minute, if we take out parts of the frequency, parts of what's coming out, because when you play like a C, for example, or I'll say like an A440, when you play that note, there's not just the note A coming out. There are other overtones and other frequencies that come, but your ear hears the most prominent one. And they figured out if we can reduce or subtract, use phase cancellation to carve out parts of that sine wave, we can make different tones on the actual instrument. Drew, go ahead and pull up that first link I shared, and it's going to show a quick example of the 4 main types of sine waves, or just like waves in general. It's going to go through a sine, a square wave, which literally looks like a square on a spectrogram, a triangle wave, and a sawtooth wave. And it just plays each one for like 4 seconds. And listener, you can get an example of sine, square, triangle, and saw waves. And they sound very different, don't they?
Yeah, yeah.
What do those kind of sound like if you were to put yourself back in the 80s playing on the floor in front of the TV? What does that kind of sound like?
I was going to say, Ira was talking earlier about like, that sounds like the 80s, and each one of those, like in different ways, but it's like, yeah, those are the the bleep blorps, as people used to call them, or whatever. It's like, yeah, it feels like sitting in front of a CRTV and eating some Doritos and drinking some Mountain Dew and having way too many wires in front of the set. Just,
Yeah, be careful how you move those wires. You might pull a speaker down on your head.
you got to
Ooh.
blow into the cartridge when your game glitches out, and then everything gets a little fuzzy on the TV. Sometimes you got to hit the side of the TV to get everything to come back. And those bleeps and blorps almost feel like a representation of that time where things are just kind of like half made or a little bit there or whatever. It's like, yeah, this,
Yeah,
what a time.
It's a cool sound, and if you go back to like playing on an NES and to a lesser degree like an Atari type thing, on the NES it had built-in sound channels in the console itself, but it was only 3 pitched channels and then one kind of what they call the noise channel. It's like just percussion sounds, basically little like blips and bloopy kind of drum sounds. But that's all it was. I think it was 1 square wave and 2 sine waves that you could use to play the notes on an NES. And if you go back right now and you play them and you listen to the clip we just played with the sine, square, triangle, and sawtooth waveforms applied to it, you can clearly hear, oh, this has a sawtooth effect on it. Oh, this one has a sine wave effect on it. And oh, that's the drum noise channel. That's all it could do unless they put more channels on the cartridge itself, which a few games like Mario 3, they did do to get a better sound library. They literally put more channels built into the cartridge and sent it from there to the TV's speakers, kind of bypassing and working with the NES in order to make more channels than just the 3 pitched ones and the 1 noise channel, which is really cool.
Oh. You could not have set me up better for the next thing that I want to play. Now we're both doing it. And for this, there's a tiny bit of setup. Ira, I would like you to close your eyes and leave your microphone on, please. Ryan, I'm just going to play for you a piece of music from our childhood that I think illustrates the point you were just making.
Should I close my eyes and guess or anything? Or
if you guess this, I am going to be extraordinarily thrilled at what kindred spirits we have turned out to be, even more than I realized.
Okay. It sounds familiar. It's like it sounds almost like Mega Man, but it doesn't have that same Mega Man quality to it, My only guess was Bionic Commando for the NES, but I honestly don't know for sure.
Ira, you remember that one, right?
Yeah, it's one of my other favorite JRPGs from when I was a kid. That's soccer based.
He's not lying. The game is called Tecmo Cup, not to be confused with plenty of other games around it called like Tecmo Super Bowl and stuff like that. It is only in aesthetic a sports game. It's actually based on a series in Japan, and there are more modern games that you can play called Captain Tsubasa.
Yeah.
And it's an anime full of melodrama, and everyone's got superpowers, and instead of going out in the world and fighting, they play soccer.
Yeah, of course. I love games like that where it takes the fighting aspect and it's like card dueling or soccer or bardic insults or something. I love that kind of stuff.
Exactly right.
And the American version we got, Tecmo Cup, they changed a lot of the characters, so it's not Captain Tsubasa, it's Robin Fields, and he doesn't look like an anime character. He's got very pink skin and very blonde hair for an American audience. But that soundtrack is killer, man. I love it.
Yeah.
While we're on it, this is actually a good segue into one of the things or two of the things I sent. So there's 2 other songs that are from that 80s era. I think one of them actually might be late 70s even. Drew, go ahead and pull up the, first, I guess I might have to edit this part out. I don't know if the Harold Faltermeyer one might get copyright stricken, possibly.
Hey, If you hear a few seconds of silence instead of music after this, I will only throw out there, related or not, that the Patreon only costs $1.
All right. So here's one that is going to sound very reminiscent of these sounds we're talking about.
Well, you know, it's funny. I latched on to something there that we haven't actually talked about yet that we heard just because when it happened, those echoing claps. Man with the Machine Gun also has those.
That's what I was going to get to. Was exactly that.
Yeah.
It was like that sort of like sort of
Yeah.
sound where it sounds like it could be a real sound, but it sounds kind of synthetic and echoey. Also, it's like in that gray area, right? But if you listen to the whole song, there are a lot of those same synth sounds we talked about: the sine wave, square, sawtooth, and triangle wave. If you pull up the other one that I sent you, the one that is just called Mystery TV Theme Song, which I'll be shocked if either of you have ever heard this before, but we're going to hear what I think is a pretty obvious one-to-one of the melody that Uematsu used in Man with the Machine Gun in this song here. And if you guys want to guess it before you play it, by all means, but good luck. So this is the theme song to the TV show SWAT. And you can hear what might be some of the biggest influences to Uematsu for writing a lot of the kind of like city themes and a lot of the just kind of in-between stuff in Final Fantasy VIII soundtrack. Because you also heard that kind of like, you know, that wah guitar. And there's this song in Final Fantasy VIII, I think it's called Intruders. It's the one when you're in like the missile base trying to figure out what's going on. And you hear that wah guitar. And you hear it in this song also, plus the 16th note, da 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 da. And I'm always kind of curious if like Uematsu heard this song somewhere and was like, I want to make the flashback sequences sound like that, but with synthesizers. And hey, there's some other cool stuff in here also. I'm gonna use that as sort of my tonal base for what we do in 8, because none of his games before that really used that kind of like 70s funk sound hardly at all. He was always more into the orchestral or rock or prog rock and folk song type things before 8, from what we can see at least.
Yeah, it's amazing you mentioned that too, because one of my big questions for you on this was, I mentioned all the way at the beginning, like, this is club music, it's EDM, it's techno, it's whatever, you know, it's electronica or whatever, but it's also music for like a group of sweeping desperado military cowboys, and it doesn't feel, as much as I think if you listen to it out of context, someone would go like, oh, that sounds kind of like something you might hear at the club. For anyone who's played the game, you're like, no, this is a hero theme. And what you just played for us, I think, explains why that he's borrowing a melody from these heroes running to save the day in this sort of old school, like Ira said, it's almost the classic everyman superhero theme of the 70s and 80s, and that's who Laguna in particular is supposed to be, right? So that's why it doesn't just feel like going to the club, because that's not really what it represents, right?
Yeah, it feels more like like you said, you're going somewhere. There's like a purpose later. It's not just stay in one place and jam. It's got, I guess, motion, purpose, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Do you have something, Ira?
No, that, I mean, I said my bit about Magnum PI, maybe a little bit MacGyver.
Yeah, you leaned in like you were. I had some
I know, right?
Important to say. So going back to the stuff with our sine waves and whatnot. Now, we talked a little bit about kind of like the way that you produce a sound using a synthesizer. It's literally just voltage being run through transistors and resistors to then produce a sound. And I didn't quite get to this part. Is that when you subtract parts of the wave out, if you look at it on a spectrogram, it literally looks like the term that's given to them. And listeners at home, I encourage you to find some YouTube videos that show like actual square, sawtooth, etc. waveforms, and they literally look like that. Like a square looks like little squares and rectangles in your waveform instead of a nice sine wave of swoops. A sawtooth has a very sharp drop at one side of it, and then it descends like a straight 45-degree angle on the other, and it can sound different depending on which way it's going as well. But a synthesizer can kind of perceive what sound is is going back into it, and it knows which parts of that waveform to subtract, to pull out from itself. And so that's where you get those really weird forms from. Do this if you don't mind, Drew. Play the little clip we had, the short video that had the sine, triangle, square, sawtooth wave. And then we'll listen to another Uematsu song, and then one more time the original Man with the Machine Gun. And for the listener at home, what I want you to do is listen to the different instruments being played throughout these little things and try to ask yourself, oh, is that a sine wave, the nice smooth one? Is it a square or sawtooth, the more bitey ones? Or is it a triangle wave, which is kind of like the in-between sound? And how is he using those so that they're not all just completely sandwiched on top of each other? You can still hear each part. So here's again, it's going to be sine, square, triangle, sawtooth in that order. I love those sounds. Okay, so now let's pull up another Final Fantasy VIII song, one of my absolute favorites. Let's listen to Force Your Way, one of the boss themes. Did you guys hear the different kinds of waveforms?
I definitely did. I, of course, forgot all their names. So oh, that's that one, and that's that one. But yeah,
but you can hear it. And this song particularly uses a rock organ or a jazz organ quite a bit as well for the parts that are like the... That's more on an organ sound. But we can use that same sound to talk about when Ira was hearing the drum bone and talking about why it sounds like things are subtractive and like there's something missing. The drum bone and things like an organ, like a literal organ with like the large pipes and everything, they have a tendency to sometimes do that same subtractive synthesis in an acoustic way because of the way that the pipes are shaped and because of how the sound waves bounce around in between them. You do have a chance of having subtractive synthesis. It's not synthesis at that point, but subtractive phase shift happen, two sound waves going through it. And that's why if you go to like one of those gigantic church organs that has like 7 different or like even more, like a dozen different manual types that you can pull and push the stops in, you get different sounds because it shapes what kind of form is coming out of the pipes based on if it's a certain kind of reed being used, a certain length of pipe, if they're doubling at the octave or doubling in some other way that might cause phase cancellation. All that stuff was being done manually hundreds of years ago before any synthesizer was ever used. And that's why the drum bone similarly does that same thing, because the sound waves are bouncing around inside that in a very percussive way that there are instances where they cancel each other out in a very acoustic method.
Cool.
That's so cool.
So I've got a question on that. So we've got the waves produced synthetically. So if we were to measure, if we were to go into the cathedral at wherever and they were to play the organ, could we measure then the waves and see if it matches up as a sine or a square, etc.?
For almost anything that's going to be like in a acoustic sense, you're going to get some form of like a really wonky looking sine wave for most acoustic
Okay.
things. There are ways where you could like really dig down and identify to see, oh, where is some synth or some subtraction, some phase cancellation happening with this. That goes way beyond my knowledge of like so what's it called, spectroscopy, and like analyzing that stuff. I know it can be done. I'm just not the person to explain
Sure.
how. But yes, you could at some point look at it very fine and say, oh, we can see that these parts are being carved out, or here's kind of like a weird sawtooth thing appearing when we put the manuals on this setting for this organ in this gigantic church or wherever it is. You can absolutely do that.
So synthetically or electronically, you can get a more pure version of a sound wave. Is that right?
Yes, you can make it as pure or as impure as you want it because it's all math. It literally is
Right.
just going, hey, if this thing coming in is 470 hertz, for example, then it knows exactly at which points in its frequency range you might want to cut out. Doing it purely acoustically takes a lot more trial and error and a lot of more fidgeting. But when it's all just electronics and math, if it's well produced equipment, you can do it, like you just said, you can do it almost perfectly depending on the equipment you have, basically.
So then, do we have an exact measurement of a note, like middle C, right? So, the first thing we did in band classes, we would fiddle it around at first, but then we would get in tune, right? And you move the slide, or you adjust your embouchure, or you tighten your strings, or whatever you got to do. But we could maybe be slightly off, so long as we were all in tune with the first chair clarinet, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, is there a way then to say, what am I trying to ask here? So, is there like a standard wavelength, etc., for a middle C that we should all be striving toward, or is it okay if like the entire band is slightly sharp?
So yes and no and yes and no. It depends. It depends. So I can speak to this as a former band director of over 10 years, public school band director, is that the short answer is most things will tune to what's called A440. And that's an A that I forget if it's the third or fourth octave. It's one of those two where if you put it up to a spectrogram, you can measure out that it's exactly 440 vibrations per millisecond. I think it's whatever hertz, whatever hertz are, or per second. And it's very precise. You can literally measure it because it's math to seconds, the vibrations per second. And so because most of them come from there, if you have, I was going to get really weird, if you have what's called just temperament versus equal temperament. Just temperament and equal temperament are slightly different because one of them, let me make sure I get the differences right. Give me 1 second. So just intonation, it basically uses precise ratios to make all of your intervals sound very pure. Whereas equal temperament is something where it divides all of the octaves equally. That's why it's called equal temperament. Most things that we hear today are going to be in just intonation, I believe. People at home, correct me if I'm wrong on this one. Just intonation is one that basically takes whatever your note to note subdivisions are, and it uses very precise ratios to kind of like round each one from whatever your source or your base pitch is. Equal temperament, however, is the one that we almost always hear, where it's going to be an octave is 1-to-1 pretty much, and then every note in between them, all 12 parts of an octave scale, are equally divided based on the distance from octave to octave. For most people, you can't hear the difference. If you heard one song that was tuned in just versus equal temperament, you're not going to really hear much different, and only really people that get into like really heavily into music theory and kind of like sound theory and stuff are going to care about it. But back to the question then of like, well, wait a minute, what if we just had everyone tune instead of to A440? What if we went to like A446, where it was 446 vibrations per second, or whatever the case is? And believe it or not, you could do that. The only downside is that there are some instruments in a band specifically that can't change their intonation. Primarily, what instruments?
Oh, well, and I guess anything that's specifically tuned to something. I'm trying to think. What's got a specific tuning?
Who always stood at the back of the back of the room?
Oh, you weirdo people! Which it,
You can tune a timpani, but you can't tune like a triangle.
I was going to say, the timpani you can kind of mess with, but
You can tune those, but mallet instruments you can't change. So if you have a xylophone, marimba, vibraphone, glockenspiel, bells, if you have any of those, you can't change those unless you permanently alter the instrument, right? You can carve out parts of it to make a bar smaller, or you can, in some rare cases, you can actually add metal or add wood to it. But that's like, don't do that. It's a really weird process. But you can't change to those. And so they're designed to be tuned generally to A440. But even like hundreds of years ago in classical music and before, there wasn't really a set upon standard. It was just kind of like, oh, we have these tuning forks that some monk usually would strike, and they would go, oh, here's our reference pitch, and now we all sing to this. And that's how a lot of music was for centuries, for millennia, if you even cared about having a proper reference note, so to say. And then they had what was called the Council of Trent, which basically it solidified and standardized a lot of music stuff in the church, in the government agencies in Europe. And a lot of it grew from out of there, basically. But even back in Haydn's day, from like Franz Joseph Haydn and Mozart, they actually tuned to a higher frequency around A444. And then over the years, for some reason or another, I don't know exactly why, that reference A444 has gone down to A442 and then A440. And I believe 440 is the standardized reference pitch now, because it's the one that everyone uses, and it just kind of stuck. That's a good question, though. Like there's a whole other world talking about like why you can or can't do that, because in theory, if the whole band was tuned up a little bit and they all played at that same up, there's nothing wrong with that. There's actually a Rush song called Xanadu that I love. And when they played it in the studio and recorded it, they listened to it back later after it was mastered and everything. And either the producer or the band themselves, they were like, it feels kind of rushed. No pun intended. It feels kind of fast. Can we actually slow it down? But in the late 70s, they didn't have the technology to slow down music while keeping the same pitch. Kind of like if you slow down a vinyl and it suddenly gets really deep. The same thing would happen. So if you try to play along to Rush's Xanadu from the album Farewell to Kings, it will not sound in tune. It's like 14 cents flat or something, because they literally slowed the whole thing down. And I remember as a high schooler trying to play along to that opening riff, and I was like, what is wrong with my guitar? I swear I just tuned it. Why does it sound so bad? And it wasn't until years later, I realized, oh, wait, it's the song is out of tune. But because it's out of itself, listening to it on its own sounds fine. There's nothing wrong with it.
That's wow. Ryan, are you at all familiar with Philomena Kunk?
Oh my gosh, I love Philomena Kunk. I need to still watch Kunk on Life. It's on my queue right now.
One of her early bits before the stuff that's on when she was just on the BBC, she does a thing on time. And she goes to somewhere, I can't remember where they've got like the keepers of time or whatever. And of course, in her great way, she says, this is where the time comes from, right? and so, as you were saying, it's like, this is where the note comes from, right? There's some sort of, we do at like military keeps time, and like the Department of Defense or whatever stupid thing we're supposed to call them now, right? Like keeps like an official measurement of time, because in a similar way to what you're talking about, like for a long time, like the difference between 5 and 10 minutes late back when it took you 5 days to get anywhere was, didn't really matter. I play my guitar out of tune all the time, and I just sing to where it is, as long as the strings are in tune with each other, right? Back to Ira's, that's a smaller version of a full orchestra, right? As long as the strings are in tune with each other, and I'm old school, I just tune it that way rather than going to whatever true note is. So the whole thing's probably out, but I can play my couple of songs and sing along and then put it back, because I'm not, recording for some record label or whatever. So it's like but as you were doing that, you got me thinking about Philomena Kunk talking about, like, she needs to do what you just did, needs to be done, but in her style. No one knew what C was, until someone decided. Haydn and Mozart didn't know what C was.
So since you mentioned it, I do have to bring up this random fact, but do you actually know how a second is measured?
No.
We have an atomic clock. There's something about how how things degrade.
It used to be on degradation. There was some weird thing that was about degradation period of something. The current way
Crystal?
that's the international unit for a second. It is the time it takes for a single cesium atom to vibrate in a second, which, if you're curious at home, happens to be 9,192,631,770 cycles per second. That's the exact accepted measurement of 1 second at sea level on planet Earth. Because as you depart, things get weird.
Right.
Because that wasn't weird enough.
I know, right? And I'm always curious, like, how did they come to this, and how did they just agree on that? My presumption is that they like had roughly a second, and they kind of like reverse engineered it, and they were like, let's find something that vibrates at this exact or as close as we can, and it'll be good enough. But tangential learning, listener, please, by all means.
I was going to say, you got to fit it into rotations and revolutions, and all that's changing all the time anyway. So.
But I guess that is how we measure time, right? It's a year is how long it takes for our planet to go around the sun, right? It's like we have to find some sort of physical manifestation to latch onto it because time is not real, which gets us back to Final Fantasy VIII.
Hey, got there. Time compression with a capital K if Ultimacia was here.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so with all of that, back to Man with the Machine Gun. I've got two samples of some other versions of this I'd love to listen to. One of them is going to be the Distant Worlds version, which I believe comes from Distant Worlds 2. And it was, from what I read somewhere, it is by far the most requested song they didn't put on Distant Worlds 1. People were like, why didn't you do Man with the Machine Gun? So they had to put it on number 2. It's one of the very first songs, so everyone could hear it. Let's give it a listen. so good. And they do a couple of different things here too, because they didn't want to do the typical thing that the video game version does, where it's just the same 2 sections looped. They threw in some flavor, right? They had some different melodies entirely added in. They had that weird like march section towards the end there that's like, oh, this is completely out of the blue, but it's still made with the machine gun. And I mean, you got to love that horn sound, right? That just ripping horn.
Yeah.
One of my most incredible days. I don't remember a lot of days as a French horn player, individual days, individual moments, individual pieces. But the day I finally learned how to go, yes.
It's a great moment in every horn player's life. My wife is a French horn player as well, and whenever we listen to a piece of music and they have like the big octave rip, what they call them, like the wop wah, and she always goes wop wah along with it. It's so good.
But there are enough different things going on in this piece, and without the synthy sound, it really reminds me of like a Leonard Bernstein sort of Candide. He's got a lot of different things going on, and they usually come together to some degree at some point. And it's a really cool song, especially played on these instruments. I think that it just shows how adaptable and interesting and cool it is.
For those of you at home who haven't heard Candide, it is a beautiful It is a beautiful piece that I encourage you all, the Candide Overture at least, it's awesome. But yeah, this has no synths in it. The Distant Worlds version, it's purely orchestral from what I can tell. Nothing odd being added to it.
I remember not loving that the first time I heard it. I was like, at least put one in there. Particularly, like, it took me a minute to get used to the snare drum being there instead of that. I was like, I would like something a little heavier on the downbeat. Back to Ira's Good Place quote. I was like, I'm kind of waiting for that downbeat a little bit this whole time. But as far as we've talked about a few different pieces that have added things in later interpretations and not always loving them, one of my favorites of all time, I remember sitting there, and when out of nowhere, this one just goes, bum, 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 ba, da, 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 dum. Like, yeah. And it doesn't turn on it. It puts that like in the middle to set you up for the B section. So I think that helps too. But like you said, just kind of breaking it up, adding that extra stuff. And then when the melody finally comes in on the strings there at the end, that once again gives me the classic Final Fantasy hero sound, as opposed to it just kind of staying as the original does in its sort of clubby feel.
Yeah, that part where it has the counter melody coming out of nowhere, where it's like and it's just that really great, just like, yeah, I'm the hero, huzzah!
Yes.
So there's that one, and then another one that's Uematsu's one of his bands that he plays with. I couldn't discuss this without playing the Black Mages version, one of my favorites. So here's now the Black Mages version. Bonus points to anyone who can identify the other Final Fantasy VIII melody that they snuck into the middle here. It's so good.
It's so good.
Is this the first time we've talked about black mages?
I was going to say, I can't believe it took us this long.
I know, right? Yeah, for those who don't know, Black Mages, it's a group that Uematsu and some other musicians made, and it was a live cover band of his own music, basically. He also had a group called, I think it was just called the Earthbound Papas. They've done some stuff before as well. But the Black Mages, they put out a few albums that were basically heavy metal, prog rock versions of Uematsu's own stuff. And it rips. I love Black Mages.
Same. It's all so good. I once spent way too much time and energy trying to get a hold of physical DVD copies of their first 2 live performances in Japan. Now all that stuff's just on YouTube. I probably paid like $150 or something like that to have some person rip it off of television or wherever they got it in Japan and send it to me from wherever. I honestly don't remember the whole process, but I already had the albums, already had the music. I wanted to see the guys performing it live. The idea that there was a group of badass auteurs who were going to play my music in front of a group of people and rock the house. Although it's kind of funny because in a lot of it's changed a little bit, but still back then, a lot of the audiences in Japanese culture, you don't like always rock out during the music exactly the same way. So they're a little more, which is funny, but the Black Mages are awesome.
What's that? A rock and roll band that was inspired by video game music and then made covers of it in a heavier form? Man, that sounds like someone I know.
Right. Slightly inspirational.
Yeah, Black Mages were a huge inspiration to me, and them and other bands like was it not Cartridge Blow? Yeah, there was Cartridge Blowers, and there was The Advantage, and all the other the original video game cover bands. They were huge influences to me. And I remember back when it was the day of using like Pandora, that was like the big streaming thing. There was a brief window where someone uploaded Black Mages stuff on there without their permission, I believe, and I was the happiest high schooler you could find. And within 1 week, it was taken down, and I was like, "No, I had it." This is before YouTube and stuff like that existed.
Yeah.
I was so happy for 1 week, and then it was taken away almost immediately.
Yeah.
This song is just rips. It's just so good.
That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening, and thank you to everyone who has reached out to us. Feel free to let us know what we missed, got wrong, or should have mentioned, plus any questions you may have or any piece you would like to hear in the future down in the comments. Make sure you're subscribed to Everything is Final Fantasy on Patreon, YouTube, and all social media platforms, and please do the same for Airship Overdrive, Ryan's project, where you can hear arrangements of some of your favorite video game music. Join us next time when we wander upon, wandering into even more overworlds.